Hello guys, it's Zebro here. If you are not familiar with the basics of spam compositions, I highly recommend you check out my Overwatch macro basics playlist first, where I discuss the key points of different compositions. In this video I will focus on the spam composition and its matchup against a mirror spam composition. Since this series will focus on more advanced concepts, it's not necessarily easy to give rules of thumb and key points. So in this video I'll go through a specific example that I think explains how spam versus spam works really well. Let's get started. Okay, so here we are on Rialto. Up until recently spam was very common on defense here. Let's say we're running Orisa, Sigma, Ashe, Hanzo, Baptiste and Zen on defense. So a pretty spammy composition. We have just come out of spawn and we are thinking about where to set up. Now you're probably already familiar with the idea that spam compositions like long sight lines and positions that they can spam the enemy from. So setting up your team on the high ground here sounds like a great idea, right? You can just spam damage as they walk across the bridge and you have the high ground. And there are countless videos on YouTube telling you high ground equals good. On top of this, we should already know that spam compositions like to take out map control, so maybe spreading out like this might be a bit better. And honestly, for a lot of teams, this wouldn't be a bad position to stand. And it is why people teach the fundamentals first, because it's only once you understand general spam positioning that you can start to take into account specific spam positioning. As my sarcastic voice may have given away earlier, this is not the optimal setup for spam versus spam. And I'll explain why. Team compositions for the most part act like maths equations. If you look at both teams and cancel out similar or matching heroes, then you can quickly work out who has a more spam-based composition. In general, the more spammy composition wants to spam, and the less spammy composition wants to either brawl, take map control, or use their advantages to come up with a different win condition. On top of this, we have to factor in that the defending team has effectively an extra Orisa shield, because they set up first. So let's imagine both teams are running mirror compositions. In other words, they have the same heroes. Then the defending team, as long as they are playing together, have the initial advantage because of the extra Orisa shield, and they can set up wherever they like and take up as much map control as you want. But setting up on the high ground here also gives the enemy the cover of the payload, so it wouldn't be that difficult to push the payload to this corner. And once the payload has gotten to this corner, our position on this high ground is terrible, like really bad. Though elo teams would suddenly jump down to this position here. Which isn't wrong, but if we do it once the payload has already gotten to the corner, then we ruin our Orisa shield advantage and we get punished mid-rotation. One thing with spam compositions is they don't usually have a Lucio, and they are weak when they haven't had time set up, so mid-rotation they can be punished really easily. So if you are going to rotate to somewhere else, and this applies for all spam on all maps, it's much better if we do it earlier than attempt to rotate 20 meters in front of the enemy team. Let's also ask ourselves, is this a good position to drop to? It seems counterintuitive, right? Playing in a situation where you don't have long sightlines, in fact, you have tiny sightlines and your map control isn't exactly massive, even if your DPS play split. This is what makes this an advanced guide. When explaining how to play spam compositions to people who haven't learnt the basics yet, it's easier to give them hard set rules to determine their positioning. But when you become better as a team, you need to make more complicated decisions. In this case, because both teams are playing spam, most advantages you have, they also have, and most disadvantages they have, you also have. So long sightlines don't really matter. What makes this corner really effective is there is a massive box of death right there that you need to push through in order to push the payload. You can't really make much use out of flank routes or high ground either. Now imagine that we are the enemy team. We can't really spam in this situation. We can send a flank around to try and hassle them, that's not a bad idea, but where would we go? We could send someone to the high ground, but we don't have good sightlines from there. We could send somebody round to the back to this choke, but spamming through this choke is really easy for Zen and Sigma to contest. And we could send all of our team on a massive wild goose chase to this high ground, but the blue team would just back up round the corner. The best bet for the attacking team in this case, is to take damage and build up ultimates. This is surprisingly common in spam vs spam matchup, and a lot of mirror matchups in general, which is to take away from the defending team's advantage by building up your ultimate as quickly as possible. In this case, the ultimate we want to generate is Baptiste's window, which charges really quickly. Which brings me on to another topic. Once the attacking team are nearing Baptiste's ultimate, then they want to be playing together, because for obvious reasons, you want as much DPS going through the matrix as possible. When playing spam, there is a difficult decision to make. When do you want to play split, and when do you want to play together? I'll save a more in-detail discussion for the next video, because I want to go into it in more depth, but what ultimates they have, and what ultimates you have, is one of the decisions that affect it. So the red team attacks the blue team with amplification matrix here. The blue team have an option. They could split up before the amplification matrix happens to minimise its effect, but that would require doing a very long rotation mid-fight, which is a no-no. It would also give the red team the opportunity to win the spam war without even using an ultimate. They could go aggressive in front of the matrix, but unless they have ultimates of their own, they have a fairly big disadvantage to that fight. The best option in this case would probably be to back up. Spam compositions find it very hard to kite ultimates because they have no Lucio, and Arisha's shield might be on cooldown. Luckily with this positioning, the route of retreat is very short. You give up ground for them to push the payload around the corner, but it's necessary. When backing up as spam, one problem I see a lot of teams make is backing up into the open here, where there is no cover. This is bad. If you are being overwhelmed and need to stabilise, this positioning is much safer. The win condition for the blue team is to survive the Baptiste window, until they can push out again with their own ultimates. Interestingly, after the amplification matrix, the attacking team kind of becomes the defending team, since they now have the map control and the defending team needs to be the aggressors. But that's okay, since the blue team now have the ultimate advantage. This process is often called ebb and flow, where you kite ultimates only to re-engage afterwards. But I will save that discussion for another video. It's worth noting that in most situations, a spam comp will not be able to back up very far without dying. Now let's talk briefly about dealing with splits or flankers. I will discuss this more in the next video in the series, but I want to talk at least a little bit about it in this episode. Imagine the team were set up like so, and the Sigma and Hanzo went to set up here to pincer you. You would obviously have to do something, otherwise they are just sniping your backline, and your Zen will just die. One option would be to mirror their split. Effectively, most of the time this cancels out their split. Obviously, in this example the enemies have the high ground advantage, but the effectiveness of their flank will still be lessened. The other better option would be to hard engage the core of their team and take the advantage fight. As a rule of thumb, when playing spam vs spam, you want to deal with different splits separately. Let's look at another example. Let's say the defending team sets up here, and the attacking team needs to decide what to do. Splitting your attention here is very bad because you will effectively deal with neither threat, whereas clearing the high ground first, and then focusing on core is a great plan. This is because we don't only deal with the threat separately, but we take the map control the defending team used to have. When attacking a split spam-based composition, we need to think about the sightlines the rest of the team has. If we were to attack the core first, for example, the Sigma and Hanzo would have the ability to help out. In fact, if we broke the enemy shields, we couldn't push up and take that space without exposing our backline to the Hanzo and Sigma spam. Whereas if we push the Hanzo and Sigma out first, then the rest of the team don't have sightlines to their Sigma and Hanzo, so they will be forced to drop. When playing spam vs spam, every fight needs to be taken separately. You play together to deal with off angles separately first, then either play split and take advantage of the map control, or play together if it's necessary for your win condition. Then you spam out the enemy shields and clean up the rest of the team. That wraps up this video, so to summarise, spam vs spam doesn't necessarily actually require you to spam, because any position you can spam, the enemy can also spam. You want to focus more on the advantages that you have, rather than just blindly trying to win the shield war. Taking space and map control is key for spam vs spam. The attacking team will find it hard to win a straight up shield war, so will need to take map control, and the defending team will want to either contest the map control, or position where the effect of the enemy map control is minimal. With spam versus spam, you want to deal with each split separately, if possible. Fighting a 6v3 beforehand to gain map control, or to get picks, will give you a massive advantage in the main fight. You generally want to play together to clear off angles and gain map control, then you split once you have map control in order to keep the map control. This isn't always possible though. As you can probably tell, a lot of spam versus spam matchup is all about map control and trying to claim as much of the map as possible. And that's it for this video. In the next video, I'll be looking at splitting in a bit more detail with the spam versus spam matchup, as well as look at 2 non-mirror compositions. Thanks for watching, and please give this video a like if you enjoyed it. It encourages me to make more videos, and if you have any questions, then feel free just to chuck them in the comments below. See you next time.